Chapter 334. Moon Rocks Are Falling on My Head. Thursday, August 29, 1996. Warren Residency, Jacksonville, Inc. United States of America. Next up. He obviously wants the cigars. Linda Warren was reading the Smoky Mountains Sentinel when she heard a tremendous crash, followed by the distinct warbling of a car alarm. Seconds later, her Muggle husband suddenly started swearing. Wondering what had happened, she ran outside. The windshield of Alvin's new Corolla had been smashed, as if something had fallen on top of it. He followed her husband's gaze, and her eyes quickly alit on the object which had done the deed. It appeared to be a large metal box, still sealed tightly. It took her a good 10 seconds for her to realize what it was, her portkey to the moon. She watched in alarm as her husband reached for it. She couldn't tell what exactly he wanted to do with it, but she had a horrifying vision of him throwing it into the trash. Alvin put his hands around it and tried to lift it. He didn't get very far, however, as all he managed to do was tilt it somewhat. Linda heard something rattling around inside, and it took her a few seconds to realize that those were probably moon rocks. She couldn't wait to open it and see what was in there. However, she knew enough about the moon to know that the box could not be opened in the presence of oxygen. Oxygen was a corrosive gas, and there was strong possibility that the moon rocks would be damaged or modified by oxygen. Alvin lowered the box and grunted. Jesus, that's heavy. No wonder it smashed the windshield. Linda, you're not going to believe this, but this box fell out of the sky and hit the car. I don't know what's in it, but there's something rattling around in there. Look what it did to the windshield. Some airline is going to get sued big time. Linda bit her lip. She couldn't tell if it was good news or bad news. Alvin, you're not going to believe it, but that's my box. Alvin stared at her. Christ, Linda, didn't those Russian astronauts tell you to not send those portkeys around? What's rattling around in there now? Satellite panels or airplane parts? If I were them, I'd go out of my way to make sure you won't interfere with the mission and threaten the safety of my ship and my crew. Hell, considering they already warned you about interfering once, I bet those are probably hand grenades. Linda chuckled. Trust me, Alvin, where that box went, there aren't any astronauts. Well, there were at one point. Alvin groaned. Okay, here's the excuse. Linda talked over him. But no one has visited this area in a quarter century. Furthermore, only 12 people have set foot there. It would have been 14 had it not been for the explosion in the Apollo 13 fuel tank. Alvin's jaw dropped in realization, and he slowly turned to stare at the box. Are you telling me this sucker went to the moon? Linda nodded. Yup. I sent it up back on Saturday and figured it would take 2 or 3 days to travel each way. It's Thursday, so that's a 5-day round trip. It's quite plausible, Alvin. I didn't expect it to land on the car, but if that's where I sent it from, I apologize. It's designed to go back where it was sent. Alvin still didn't like it. Glaring at her, he roared. We're talking a good $1,000 of repairs here, probably. That's 100 galleons. This is a brand new car. Linda shrugged. Don't worry, we can afford it. After all, moon rocks are extremely valuable. Alvin froze, then turned to look back at the box. Are you telling me that there are moon rocks in there? Linda nodded. I hope so. The spell was supposed to open the box when it reached the destination, bury itself a few inches under the surface, skim across the ground for a few dozen feet or so digging up rocks, reseal the box, and send the box back. Considering that there's something in there, the box is sealed, and there was nothing in there when we sent it. There's a strong probability that the spell worked. Linda grinned. Oh, there's more. You see, I attached a few mounted cameras to the sides of the box. They were supposed to take pictures out the front when the door was open. Hopefully, that will provide proof that the mission was a success. The odds of any of them surviving impact, I had to admit, were low, even with magical protection. However, I thought the odds were worth a try. Can I take a look at for a second? I want to see if the cameras have a shot here. If it landed upside down, the rocks will have crushed the cameras. Hold on a second here. She walked over to the box and frowned. Yup, it landed upside down. That could be a problem. Not only are we going to need to open this in a vacuum, we're going to need to do it in the dark as well if we have any chance of retrieving the photographs. The cameras may have been damaged on impact and possibly exposed parts of the film. We don't want them to be exposed to light too early. What time is it now? Alvin looked at his watch. 8:21. I was about to go to work, but I think I'm going to have a bit of a problem driving if the windshield has that nice hole in it. Why do you ask? If we're lucky, someone at Unc Wilmington's physics department will be in, and we can talk to him. Let's call the school and see if they have a vacuum chamber or a room which can be filled with argon or another inert gas, and one which doesn't have any lights in it. Alvin rolled his eyes. And how are we going to get there? Linda shrugged. By broom. Alvin flinched and looked longingly at the car. What? Yup, by broom. Here, help me pick this thing up so we can strap it to the back. And be careful, this side up. Physics Department, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Professor Dylan Long looked at Linda in disbelief. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that you sent one of those Portkeys to the moon and came back with moon rocks? Yes, Professor. We've got the rocks over there on the back of the broom. You can see I'm a witch, sir. After all, you saw me come in. Long shook his head. How the hell did you manage to send one of those things to the moon? Are you sure you didn't make a mistake and it wound up in Canada or something? Linda grinned. It worked, all right. I tried a Portkey to Mir and got a nasty letter written back by one of the cosmonauts. Long drew a deep breath. You're the one who did that. I've heard crazy Russian rumors about something like that happening, but most of us had passed it off as a joke. It's not a joke, Professor. If you wish, I can go back and retrieve the piece of paper. I assure you it's real. Long glared at her. You realize that you put those astronauts' lives in danger, Miss Long. You could be arrested for that. Linda shrugged. I used an old shoe. I didn't think it would be that much of a problem. I must have forgotten the weightlessness. Trust me, I won't do that again. The experiment did what I wanted it to do, and that's all that matters. Now, if you wouldn't mind, can we see what we've picked up here? Still not convinced she was on the level, he booked some time for the vacuum chamber and weighed the box. 120 pounds. Seeing Linda was frowning, he explained that he wanted to determine how many pounds of moon rocks had been brought back. This could be done by comparing the weight of the empty box to the weight of the full box. Linda nodded. The empty box weighed about 50 pounds. That's about 70 pounds of moon rocks. Is that a lot? Long's eyebrows shot up. A lot. That's almost on the level of one of the 6 Apollo landings. Granted, you have no idea what you picked up or where, which reminds me, where did you take this from? The Apollo 11 site, the first place I could think of. I see. That could be useful. We could confirm the origin of your rocks by comparing them to known samples from Armstrong and Aldrin. First things first, let's get everyone out of here, throw in the argon, and see what we've got. Everyone into the bunny suits. Argon, do you have R? Long shook his head. No, I take it you need to use magic to open it. Yes, the problem is that without R38, anything electric in these suits you're talking about will stop working when I cast the spell. Could that cause complications? Long grunted. Yes, what's plan B? Linda chuckled. Well, we can always find a drill or saw capable of cutting through this stuff. 5 hours later, all the preparations were complete. Red lights were filling the lab for photography development and protection, and the team had suited up and was about to start drilling into the box. Part 1 of the plan was to breach the vacuum seal and let the argon come in. Once pressure was equalized, they'd slice off the top of the box with a saw-like contraption. It took them a while to open the box. However, it was worth the wait. The bottom half of the box was filled with all sorts of rocks, mostly mere basalt and regolith. There were two big surprises, however. The first of these was something which looked to be extremely reflective in the red light. It took them a good 30 seconds to realize that it was likely part of the lander, possibly a flaked-off piece of mylar from the heat shield. The second surprise was much less pleasant. Seconds after opening the lid, large quantities of silvery dust began wafting out of the box into the room. Long swore when he saw this and told everyone to take the cameras off the lid, put the lid back on, and get out. Linda frowned. Why? That's probably moon dust. It's extremely fine and made of silica, and it's very good at damaging things like bunny suits. It's also a health hazard. The rest of the investigation has to be done by NASA in a specially designed vacuum lab. How are those cameras doing? Linda turned over the lid. Most of the cameras appear to be in ruins. However, one of them appears to be intact. Is the film integrity compromised? I don't think so, no. Good. Take out the camera, replace the lid, and let's get out of here. It was almost 8:00 by the time the students in the photography lab finished developing the pictures on the surviving camera. Many of the views were blocked by rocks or the snowplow of regolith being pushed in front of the speeding box. Several of them had the horizon at an angle, as if the box had been moving across uneven terrain. 4 of them, however, stood out. Apparently the camera, and therefore the shots, had been pointing in a different direction from the previous ones. 3 shots showed the clearly recognizable, though somewhat micrometeorite-scarred spider form of eagle standing on the lunar surface, albeit sideways, as the box had likely been sliding into a crater. The 4th showed the American flag, faded badly by the blinding sunlight. The 4 images were immediately stored to disk and analyzed with software. One of the lander shots was clear enough to make out part of a placard placed on its legs. Foot upon the moon, July 1969, AD. Everyone looked at each other in disbelief as someone else ran in. The preliminary report indicated that 72.53 pounds of rocks had been brought in. It was likely too late to talk to NASA. However, there was still tomorrow. This was going to be big, very big. Chapter 335. Another use for a cigar. Thursday, August 29, 1996, Oval Office, White House, Washington. United States of America. President Clinton never imaged that he would be holding a press conference with Fidel Castro in the Oval Office. How the world had changed, he thought. Less than a year ago, come to think of it, less than 3 months ago, Cuba had been a pariah state and one of the United States' most insidious adversaries. The world had changed forever on Judgment Day, when both Miami and a location near Havana had been hit by nuclear blasts. Both Florida and Cuba had been thrown into turmoil, and people had to ask for help all over the world to deal with the disasters. The attack near Havana had come first, when a multinational force consisting of both wizards and Muggles had tried to blow away the Death Eaters who had been let into the country by Castro and had promptly started running amok. Cornered by Atlantean agents, the Death Eaters had done the only thing they could to deal with such a dangerous threat: detonate one of the 25 kiloton mini-nukes which Voldemort had sent to Cuba. Needless to say, the surviving Death Eaters had not been happy, blamed Atlantis and the United States for the explosion, and vowed revenge. Figuring that Castro would have wanted such an attack anyway at some point, they had sent another mini-nuke over to Miami in a retaliatory strike. Much of the city had been leveled, and part of the shoreline had been washed away to become a brand new Dialynis Bay. The 2 attacks had been almost lost in the chaos of Judgment Day, seen as minor skirmishes in the attacks on London and New York, and the worldwide operations to destroy the Death Eaters and Al-Qaeda. This fact added insult to death and injury. As for the people in the affected areas, their lives had been radically changed, and in all too many cases ended prematurely. Donations of food and supplies had flooded into both targets shortly after the attack, and this had had resulted in an unprecedented sharing of culture and resources between Cuba and the United States. Over the past 2 months, Clinton had watched in amazement and pride as more and more people in Cuba began to think of the United States as an ally state and not a capitalist adversary. Castro, of course, still wanted the United States put in his place. However, he was not in much of a position to bargain, as antagonizing the United States would choke off the aid for the people of Havana. Slowly but surely, Castro had begun loosening the communists' grip on the country, allowing first a couple of reforms and a few weeks later a bunch more. The changes soon snowballed, and the entire nation soon found itself petitioning for more and more changes. The Cuban leader soon found himself trying to stop a cultural landslide with his bare hands, and a few weeks ago he had finally given up. Cuba was going to return to a more capitalist system, and there wasn't much anyone would be able to do about it. His final attempt to restore order 2 weeks ago had been met with nationwide protests and another warning from President Clinton. Clinton saw that Castro wasn't happy. The Cuban leader just looked resigned. He had tried to make Cuba communist, and he had seen his dream through for 4 decades. Nevertheless, all dreams had to come to an end. Clinton had tried to console him by saying that very few cultural institutions could have survived a nuclear exchange and Judgment Day without major changes. Determined to save face in front of the camera, Castro nodded to Clinton and to the cameraman. The cameraman counted down from 10 and pointed at the president as the red light turned on. Clinton smiled into the camera. "Good afternoon, my fellow Americans. I hope you are doing well, and I hope you have been weathering the storm from Judgment Day, June 20th, the best you can. Rest assured that the federal government has done, is doing, and will do everything in its power to end this economic downturn and bring the country back to prosperity. I have called a press conference to announce a major change in policy towards Cuba and its people. As many of you are aware, New York, London, and Miami were not the only cities attacked by nuclear weapons on Judgment Day. A bomb exploded in upstate New York, Tel Aviv took a hit, and several bombs exploded in the Koreas. What many of you may not remember is the fact that a nuclear weapon detonated outside of Havana. Our sources believe that it was a suicide bombing triggered by a Death Eater wizard when he was about to be overcome by the forces of morality and law. Although Havana itself was spared by the blast, many people were killed, and Cuba was thrown into chaos and confusion. Breaking from long-standing policy, Fidel Castro appealed to America for emergency assistance. We honored his request and sent over desperately needed food and supplies. What happened next, however, astonished most of the people in Washington. American aid rapidly began to erode decades' worth of animosity between the United States and Cuba. Fidel Castro, realizing that he could not stem the tide, slowly began to introduce democratic reforms. This accelerated the process, and soon reforms were coming at a very brisk pace. Today is August 29th, barely 2 months after Judgment Day. I have the pleasure to announce that Cuba is slowly starting to transition from a fully communist society into one which is becoming more and more democratic by the week. President Castro and I recognize that changing Cuba into an American-style democracy will take many more years, but it is clear that the process is underway and is likely irreversible. To thank the Cuban people and President Castro for their faith in our way of life, it is my pleasure to announce that the embargo on Cuban goods and travel will be lifted September 1st. For the first time in decades, Americans will be able to travel to Cuba as full tourists, and Cubans will be able to do the same. In addition, Americans will be able to purchase souvenirs in Cuba from private companies and vendors. This will help nurture Cuba's budding democratic movement, as well as provide the stricken nation with extra cash and supplies. Both President Castro and I have come to believe that both nations will benefit from this change of policy. The two nations will be beating swords into plowshares, and enterprising members of the Cuban lower classes will be able to make their way out of poverty and begin their pursuit of the American dream. Cuba has a lot to offer in terms of art and culture. However, it is best known for its cigars. Keep in mind, though, that smoking is bad for your health, so if you choose to use the cigars, you do so at your own risk. Clinton couldn't help but think of another use he had for a cigar. However, he doubted the American people really wanted to know about it. Perth Squarehigsmead, Jean and Eileen Sigmund, also known as Yevgeny Zyganov and Halina Zyganova, took a look at the house. It was small but serviceable, and it was available for a 6-month lease. The real estate agent had been a bit surprised that the 40-something couple had wanted to live in a place with a bunch of 20 and 30-somethings, but Zyganov said that he and his wife still felt young at heart. Zyganov looked at his wife, who nodded. Smiling, he turned back to the real estate agent. "Well, my wife likes it, and what she says goes. I think we'll take it." The real estate agent grinned and handed over some sheets of parchment. "Excellent choice, Mr. and Mrs. Sigmund. We can start on the paperwork right here." Zyganov hated paperwork, but he didn't see any way to avoid it here. He began filling out forms. This left his wife free to talk to the real estate agent. Halina looked around their new home. "Is there an address book around here? I want to see what resources we have available here. A map will help as well." The real estate agent nodded and headed through the door. "Sure, Mrs. Sigmund. I'll go get one of each." Zyganov was about a third of the way through the paperwork when the realtor came back with 2 documents. "Here are a map and an address book. Just write the name of the person you want to see on this parchment, and it will print out his address and phone number." Halina looked at the documents skeptically. "Is it up to date?" "Of course, Mrs. Sigmund. It's magical after all." Halina nodded and started writing down obvious locations like police station and fire station. Although those locations were useful, they weren't really what she wanted. It took a good 2 minutes for her to bore the realtor enough to have him turn back to her husband. Now was her chance, she thought. She scratched out bank and wrote down Belle Amelia. The address came back, 59 Grey Street, Perth Square, Unit 8. Halina smiled and wrote that down under bank. The book was indeed up to date. Chapter 336, Three's a Crowd. Friday, August 30, 199,659, Grey Street, Perth Square, Higsmead. Halina Zyganova found the street very quickly. Making sure to not do anything suspicious, she headed down the street to see if she could find Amelia Bell's home. 59 Grey Street proved to be a small apartment building. Halina estimated that it probably held 6-9 units, 2 or 3 to each floor. This worried her a little. She had hoped that the new Muggle studies teacher would be living by herself in a house of her own, in which case getting rid of her and polyjuicing into her wouldn't be of a problem, as no one would be there to see her. Unfortunately, that was not the case. She could only hope that her target was a bit of an introvert and didn't talk to that many people in the other apartments. She saw a directory listing for the apartment on one of the walls just inside the front door. She looked for Amelia's name on the wall and came across an even more unpleasant surprise. Unit 8 Amelia, Bellabigal Popedemy Woods. Merlin's beard, she thought. Not only did the girl not live in her own building, she had roommates as well. This was going to be a big problem. Even if Amelia were an introvert and didn't interact much with the rest of the people in her building, there was no way that Halina could get rid of her without the roommates noticing. She couldn't go over there, ring the bell, and polyjuice into the first person she saw there because odds were that the person she chose wouldn't be Amelia. There was another issue as well. Even if she did manage to polyjuice into Amelia, she would have to go back to this apartment every night after work, because otherwise the roommates would wonder where she was. This would leave her husband alone by himself. She didn't think he would be the type to start sleeping around, but who knew? Could she convince Amelia to move out and then get her while she was alone? That was possible, but it still required that Helena identify which of these three women was Amelia in the first place. Furthermore, the possibility of her writing a letter in Amelia's parents' names asking her to move out, trusting the owl to deliver it, wouldn't work for several reasons. First, she suspected Amelia's parents were helping out with the rent, as this was an expensive area, which explained the roommates, and it wouldn't make sense for the parents to want to pay more rent. Second, the parents were Muggles and wouldn't send mail by owl. Third, Helena and the parent she was trying to impersonate would likely not have the same handwriting. Finally, Amelia would naturally want to try to talk to her parents and discuss this change of plans. Since the parents hadn't sent the letter in the first place, they would be quite surprised at this. Killing the two roommates was out of the question. She didn't like killing much, for one thing. For another, the more dead bodies showed up, the more likely it was that she would be caught before she completed her mission of killing Dumbledore and retrieving his wand. For all she knew, Amelia could be enough of a suspect in the deaths of the two roommates for her to be fired from her job, removing Helena's access to Dumbledore. What a mess. The more she thought about it, the more she came to realize that there was only one plausible solution. Sneak into Hogwarts during the start-of-term feast and be in the Great Hall when Dumbledore introduced the new staff members. That would tell her what Amelia looked like. The next step would be to have her husband ask Rasputin to send over another woman to be willing to become a second Amelia clone. At the end of each day at Hogwarts, Helena would return home to her husband, while this second woman polyjuiced herself to continue fooling the roommates. This second Amelia would be in a more dangerous position than Helena herself, as she faced the possibility of being detected in her true form, either while she was asleep. God help them all if the three women shared the same bedroom, or if the polyjuice potion ran out. However, that would no longer be Helena's problem. Waiting until the start-of-term feast was dangerous. However, it made it possible for Helena to come up to Amelia to talk to her without thinking of an excuse. Once Amelia introduced herself as the Muggle studies teacher, she would likely be a bit of a celebrity in town, the second Muggle ever to teach at the school. If Helena came over, claimed she was a reporter, and pulled Amelia aside for a private interview, that could work. She would have to become Amelia's double as soon as possible after the start-of-term feast, preferably that night. The more the students and teachers interacted with Amelia, the more likely it would be that Helena would do something Amelia didn't do. Granted, Helena planned on using legilimency to pick Amelia's mind so that she could learn Amelia's habits and lesson plans, but that wouldn't be perfect. The question now was, how was she going to break into Hogwarts for the start-of-term feast? There would probably be high security and press coverage, as the Muggle King of England was supposedly going to become a student. Press coverage. Helena grinned. She had an idea Jacksonville, NC. Thankfully, the second Portkey didn't land on her husband's car again. However, it was obvious that the experiment had been a failure. The box had made it to the moon and back in only 3 hours, just as she hoped. Unfortunately, the ride had been so turbulent and the accelerations had been so high that the box had broken up either during transit or at arrival at the moon. It looked like she was going to have to stick to Apollo-level speeds for the time being. Her impromptu moon mission had made the news. She wondered how NASA was reacting to this. Chapter 337, Space Race Roman II. Friday, August 30, 1996, Goddard Space Flight Center, Washington. DQ United States of America. Jeff Gulliver stared at the newspaper in disbelief. This had to be a joke. North Carolina witch sends Portkey to moon returns with 70 pounds of moon rocks and photographs of Apollo 11 lander. Associated Press, in a major breakthrough for magical technology and space travel all over the world, witch Linda Warren from Jacksonville, NC, has just completed the world's first amateur moon mission. Warren, 44, enchanted a steel box with a Portkey charm and sent it to Tranquility Base, the location where man first set foot on the moon. This unmanned probe burrowed into the lunar surface, shoveled some soil into the box, sealed the box, and returned to Earth after taking photographs of the site. Warren explained that she did a great deal of research and experimentation before embarking on this mission. I know a lot about portkeys, but I didn't know how fast I would be able to transport them or how far they could go, so I went one step at a time. I first sent a portkey from my house to Las Vegas. When that came back intact, I sent another to MT, Everest, with a camera. The third portkey was sent to a moving target, a friend of mine driving a car a few miles away. The witch explained how the experiments continued until she was able to send a portkey to the Mir space station, much to the surprise of the cosmonauts on board. This last test paved the way for the moon probe. The 70 pounds of moon rocks retrieved by the probe does not seem like much compared to the 850 pounds picked up during the Apollo missions. However, sending a portkey to the moon is many orders of magnitude cheaper than launching a lunar probe, let alone a sample return mission. In Warren's words, I only spent $300 on the box and $50 each on the cameras. That's $600. Compare that to the Apollo 11 mission, which cost roughly $1 billion in 1996 dollars. Warren explained that she read a lot of Muggle material on the moon missions and moon rocks before she sent the probe. I realized that it would be important for the moon rocks not to be exposed to air once the box brought them in, and I realized that the surface temperature of the moon can be very high when the sun is out and very cold when it's not. The samples returned from the moon included a piece of mylar heat shielding from the lander, which had been stripped by micrometeorites. Continued. Page 3. He turned to page 3 and nearly dropped the paper when he saw the 4 pictures featured on that page. One was of the American flag, which looked as if it had faded a bit under the extreme temperatures and the unfiltered sunlight. The other 3 were of the lander, albeit tilted at bizarre angles. One of them was apparently sharp enough to read some of the text on the placard mounted on the lander's legs. He was about to start reading page 3 when one of his office mates burst into the door with the paper in his hand. Jeff, you're not going to. Glover held up the paper. Let me guess, Michael. You're about to tell me some witch figured out how to send something to the moon for $600. Yup, I saw that as well. Impressive, yes. Whether it really happened, I'm not sure. Remember, you've got wizards involved, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have the same penchant for practical jokes that some of us do. Michael nodded. It's real, Jeff. The Air and Space Museum just picked up the negatives from Linda's camera, along with a very irritated note from one of the cosmonauts on Mir. Debbie claims to have seen them herself on display. There's also a good 3-pound moon rock there, which wasn't there before. Glover frowned. That's a lot of evidence. However, you have to understand there was magic involved here, and we don't know. Michael pointed at the paper again. Take a look at the bottom of page 3. The preliminary tests, albeit very simple ones, on the rock given to the Smithsonian seem to indicate that it's the same type of material retrieved by Armstrong and Aldrin. If it's a hoax, it's a good enough hoax to fool even a couple of people from the Smoky Mountain facility. Ariadne has already issued a statement claiming that the moon rocks are real, and there have been several messages from Mir which seem to support this witch's theory. There are even a few shots of a Nike sneaker floating in space where it shouldn't be and disappearing a few moments later. The astronauts had covered it up for the most part because they didn't want everyone on Earth to think they were crazy. Michael paused for a moment. You do realize what this means, Jeff. We may have competition to deal with, competition which is much more affordable than the traditional methods, so to speak. Glover grunted. You're thinking that our funding is going to get cut a little, especially if this Warren woman decides to start her own private spaceflight company and can start shooting things up there for a zillionth of the cost. Quite possibly. One advantage we do have, however, is the fact that this probe was unmanned. We still have the American monopoly when it comes to manned space travel. The question is, how long is it going to be before Warren sends herself somewhere? I see where you're going. Glover clamped his mouth shut as he saw his boss walk into the room with his own copy of the paper in his hand and a big grin on his face. Glover scratched his head. What was he so happy about? The boss didn't leave him waiting. There's a very strong probability that you're about to get a new coworker, guys. Her name is Linda Warren, and she'll be commuting in from North Carolina via apparition. Unless you've been sitting under a rock for the past few hours, you probably recognize the name. Michael cheered. That's very good news, boss. My guess is our space program is going to advance much more quickly than we had ever dreamed. What's she going to be focusing on at first? If we get her, she's going to try to see what she can do to increase the speed of the Portkeys and ensure that the boxes have been completely sterilized before they begin their journey. Granted, that box was traveling much faster than usual, but you know how big the solar system is. The Portkey wasn't going that much faster than Apollo, and at that speed it will still take a very long time to get anywhere outside the inner solar system. And unless she can figure out how to travel faster than light, you can forget anything outside the solar system. I doubt people will want to wait 9 years to get to Alpha Centauri and back. Once she's beefed up the velocity of the Portkeys, she's going to try to beef up the size of the Portkeys and see if they can be used to transport humans. Heian Foothills, Region Houenhamland. Heian was just another town on the road. The penultimate before the Isala widened into a lake, and the north-south road branched off west towards Kinaras. The settlement had a population around 2,000, some of whom have fled north or east like Mistress Hahatch and her husband, Latchen, or have gone to war like the most hot-headed of the local yahoos. Strong Hoof Manor, dominating a plantation near the town, was slightly scorched, but fire damage was thankfully reduced by the never-ending, oddly salty rain and the general absence of the Angers target. The army of Lord Garhim, now numbering in the tens of thousands, had some difficulties housing all the troops. Some of them, like the mercenaries, had bigger on the inside, magic tents, but the majority had only normal ones or nothing at all. Garhim made the decision to ask for an equal number of yahoos now, humans and centaurs, to be taken in by the locals for the night. The rest huddled together in the tents, in several smaller camps on the top of hills surrounding Heian. High ground was important. This year's wet season wasn't over yet, nor the salty rains. Wizards and medics walked the army restlessly, looking for signs or hazards of illness. They couldn't afford an outbreak now. At least the town's population was welcoming. Earlier that day, he'd been worried by rumors that centaurs from the north have been sighted lurking around, but surely they would not attack such a large army. As it turned out, they had no intention of attacking. Shortly before sunset, his eyes picked up a wailing chant coming from the shrublands in the east, approaching. Shortly afterwards, just about when his men came asking for his presence for the reception of a most surprising group of supporters, he could pick up the meaning of the chant. It was an old centaur dialect, predating Gulliver and barely ever used anymore except for names. But as a member of a great old family of the South, descending from the last Khans before unification, his teachers made sure he learned it. As he translated and recognized the text, waves of dread swept through him. The Lord of the South is coming, I hear the thunder of his hooves. On the road north he rides. His enemies will cower before him. The sky itself will weep tears of grief. The earth itself will tremble in fear. The very waters will turn into poison, and hellfire will consume even the stones of houses. He is the Lord of Doom, and he will bring forth the change of the world. Would it be him, the foretold Lord of Doom, bringing forth a great cataclysm? It was not his intention, but if it was written in fate. It doesn't matter now, he decided. What matters is that some people, who would otherwise be his enemies, heard the ancient prophecy and decided to side with him. As for the ominous lines, he would worry about those when they happened. After all, there were other prophecies, yet to be triggered about the future of the Houenhams, A man of reason like him would clearly see that the described events would not be the end of his people. Chapter 338. Destination Mars. Friday, August 30, 1996, Warren Residence, Jacksonville, United States of America. Next up. I see dead people. It was good thing she had Gemini'd that second box, she thought. The first box had been completely destroyed in the most recent experiment, and she didn't want to spend $600 more to buy another one. There had been a brief and embarrassing interview with the Department of Magic, who had showed up at her house shortly after she had duplicated the box. Fortunately, it had been easy to convince him that she had copied the box after all. He couldn't avoid seeing two identical boxes in her driveway. She was let off with an official warning and an unofficial wish for good luck with future Portkeys. The latest experiment had been to get some sediment from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, many miles down off the continental shelf. Not knowing if the spell would work, she had focused on a point on her globe in her head, weighted the box down enough so that it would sink to the bottom if it materialized on the sea surface, and cast the Portkey charm. Judging from the crushed remains of the box which had fallen out of the sky, she had a strong suspicion what had happened. The Portkey had successfully made it to the destination and had slowly started descending to the ocean floor, at which point the water pressure had become so great that it had overcome the defenses she had put around the box and destroyed it. The Smithsonian isn't going to like this, she thought. They had already taken the note from Mir, a moon rock, and some of the photographs. She had promised them that she would hand over the box once she was done with the latest set of experiments. That wasn't going to happen, however. She planned to send over this new box as soon as she was finished with this latest experiment. Getting samples from the moon had been impressive. However, it would be nothing compared to this latest attempt, getting samples from the surface of Mars. She had tinkered with the recipe for the Portkey and had managed to speed up the box enough for it to get to Mars and back safely in approximately a month and a half. That would be significantly longer than the trip to the moon, of course. However, there wasn't much she could do about that. Mars was much further away from the Earth than the moon was. The preparations for setting up the Mars box were similar to those for setting up the moon box. She would sterilize the box and the cameras to the best of her ability before sealing it, and this time she would make certain that the box landed right side up. The Mars mission, however, had several complications, which the moon mission had never had to deal with. First and foremost was the fact that the books claimed that Mars may have once had water, and if so, primitive life. For all the scientists knew, the water and life may still be down there somewhere. She had read that oxygen was a very reactive gas, one which could damage all sorts of unusual life forms if they still existed on Mars. She therefore had to make certain to remove all of the air from the Portkey before sending it on its way. In addition, Mars had a thin but distinct atmosphere. She figured that the Portkey should at least try to bring an air sample back to Earth. Sealing a vacuum in the box would help here, as well in that air would rush in as soon as the box was opened on the surface of the red planet. Bringing an air sample along for the ride could be important for the health and well-being of any Martian life forms which were going to be traveling back to Earth. The second major complication came from the fact that it would be unwise to open the box at her home or even the Wilmington lab. The combination of Martian air, along with possible alien life forms, required that it be opened in a place with far better quarantine, such as NASA itself. NASA would also be much more qualified to capturing and studying the Martian air than some physics lab in Wilmington. She looked forward to working with NASA. Magic would likely allow the space program to expand beyond the Muggles' wildest dreams. What's more, if the rumors were true that Boeing was thinking of getting into space travel, manned interplanetary spacecraft might not be as far away as she had thought. Looking at the star chart to make sure that Mars was visible in the sky, she nodded and tapped the Portkey to send it off on its mission to Valles Marineris. 6 weeks from now, if everything went as planned, the human race will have retrieved its first Martian rock, and air samples. The Portkey disappeared, along with virtually all of the streetlights in the area. People came out of their houses to ask where the power failure had come from, and the neighbor across the street suddenly started screaming that his microwave oven had shorted out and was on fire. Linda had a horrible suspicion that she knew what happened. The sheer amount of magical energy required to send the package to Mars at a high rate of speed had been enough to short out electrical systems in a good 300-foot radius. Thankfully, cars kept on operating with their metal Faraday cages, shielding them from the electronic interference. Her husband began complaining that the TV had shorted out, and she began to worry if the power surge had been enough to make it through the R38 barrier. She hadn't seen this effect to this extent with the moon Portkey, though her neighbor had eventually told her in passing that his phone lines had been garbled momentarily, and a light had gone out here and there. This would be the last interplanetary Portkey to be sent from this house, she decided. The next ones would be sent from a secure, safe location on NASA property. Xyland Embassy Cylinder / Rock-to-Rattle Trading Post. It hadn't taken Megan Baldwin much convincing to let Oxford University to send her on this mission. She had started to make a name for herself and the university through her link to Hogwarts, and both parties wanted to promote themselves still further. That mental screw-up, which convinced her that her mother had been deathly ill, may have cost her her position at Hogwarts, but that didn't mean she could take on something possibly even more important. Right now, she and a group of 10 other anthropologists were sitting in a meeting room in the Trading Post on Kodiak Island in the United States. They had been selected by the Xyland ambassador to be the first group of Muggles to visit Zalenda. Sitting across the room from them were 10 citizens of Zalenda, 3 men and 7 women. The ambassador claimed that they were anthropologists as well, and would be undertaking a similar mission studying the Muggles of the United States. This mission would be easier than many other investigations of new cultures because the language barrier, while there, was relatively minor. Most of the Xylands spoke Gulliver, a bizarre dialect of English which seemed to be a cross between Shakespeare and some unknown language. People would sometimes have to repeat their requests to get the messages across, but communication was at least possible. Megan was starting to have an awful suspicion about what she'd find out there. First, a previously unknown territory called Houyhnhnmland had a revolution, and now another country in the Pacific spoke a language whose name sounded a lot like the fictional character Gulliver. Combine this with the discovery of a kingdom of giants up in the Pacific Northwest, and it made her start wondering whether the Gulliver's travels expeditions had actually taken place. Swift had claimed that Houyhnhnmland had been a country where talking horses had ruled humans, a description which had proven to be almost exactly correct. Could this Zalenda have been visited by Gulliver as well? Had this particular nation been edited out of Swift novel because the humans were boring? The Xyland representatives looked at her and fidgeted a little. Finally, one of them basically shrugged. "You're going to find out anyway, I suppose, when you come over. Yes, the other islands exist. The dread Gulliver visited us as well, and we obliviated him when he left so word of our existence never made it back to the Muggle world. However, I plead with you to not reveal information about Lilliput and the other nations to the Muggles. They have not yet agreed to reveal themselves to your world, and it would be discourteous in the extreme to expose them without their permission." Houyhnhnmland, incidentally, hadn't planned to come out either. They only exposed themselves, because some human rebel sabotaged the device, hiding them from your world, to try to get the United States' attention after the Americans interfered with Círdan. One of the other Muggles frowned. Interfered with what? The Xyland swore and looked around for support. Eventually, he explained that Círdan was another nation-state, and that its location and existence must also be kept secret. Each emissary was given an invisibility cloak to ensure that he or she be able to study the inhabitants of the target society without interference. The Xylens had been inoculated against Muggle diseases, and the Muggles were currently working on a shot, which would ensure that the Muggle anthropologists not get sick on Xylend soil. The Muggles had naturally been extremely excited when they first received their cloaks, and there had been several experiments which inevitably resulted with people bumping into and scaring each other. The ambassador, who had expected this, had rolled his eyes and told everyone that these cloaks were not toys and should be treated with care. The latest reports had the vaccinations against the Xylend diseases ready for use by Tuesday. Once the shots were out of the way, the two missions would begin. The ambassador would escort the 10 Muggles over to a Portkey capable of transporting multiple people, and the expedition would begin. Meanwhile, the 10 Xylend would be placed on a boat and sent to Juneau, where they would start their observations. Megan couldn't wait for this to get started, and she could tell that her impatience was shared by the other scientists. Chapter 339, Civil War Vet Interview. Friday, August 30, 1996, Department of Mysteries Location Classified Department of Magic United States of America. Next up. If you lose, bite him. Michael Durant burst into Joe Hughley's office with a sheepish look on his face and a book in his hand. You're not going to believe this, Joe, but I finally figured out what a parapon in I means. Hughley's eyes widened. That's great. What did that woman say? Durant chuckled. Think about it for a second. You're flying around in Sheol, minding your own business, when all of a sudden you see something unusual. What is the first thing you would likely ask your friend? Hughley thought for a second, then shrugged. Hey, what's that? Durant nodded and showed him the book, which appeared to be a Malay English dictionary. That's exactly how that woman responded. It's Malay, Joe. That expression means, what the hell is this? Hughley nearly died laughing. We should have known. We send the probe in, this lady sees it, wonders what it is, and picks it up. We spent all this time thinking it was a hex or curse or something, but it's not. All that worry for nothing. We definitely learned something, though. Indeed, Joe, and judging from the fact that a new, more extensive probe is ready, we're going to learn a lot more in a few minutes. We finally figured out how to get it to fly around in there, and it cost under $400. Hughley whistled and got up. Really? How'd you do it? Joe chuckled. Flying carpet. Those two kids have set up a store in Prescott, conveniently located right next to one of the man apparition points. Come on down, and I'll show you everything we've got here. The two men went down to the death chamber. The entrance to the death gate was closed, as usual. Sitting a few feet in front of the entrance was a small flying carpet festooned with images of Kermit the Frog and Bugs Bunny. The edges of the carpet had odd magical contraptions placed on them, presumably to push the borders to steer the carpet remotely. The center of the carpet had a large glass box on it filled with instruments. A long wire snaked out of the glass and over to a power generator. Durant pointed at the box. Look what we've got in here, Joe. We've got a camera like last time, this time enhanced by a two-way communication system so that we can talk to the dead people. There's a thermometer, barometer, and a whole bunch of Muggle instruments to sample the environment. At the front of the box are two Muggle illumination devices, which will allow us to see the immediate vicinity. He lifted the rug up a little so that Hughley could see the writing on the bottom. We replaced the Guinevere's flying carpet's logo with a message to the dead written in Malay, English, Chinese, and Hindi. We're telling them that we have come in peace and would like to learn more about their world. Hughley clapped his hands as Durant let the edge of the rug drop. Bravo, Mike. That's impressive. How long did it take you to cobble that together? Not that long, Joe. That astronaut witch gave us the idea for the box, and most of the time was spent going to various Muggle stores trying to purchase the Muggle equipment. Hughley looked around the room. I see. You're still planning to pull it back by yanking on the cord. I suspect that carpet is made of organic materials, so it may not be able to come back. Durant nodded. We're planning to use the cord in case the carpet doesn't want to come back. I suspect the carpet will go in and out without any issues, though. There isn't an organic thing in it. Hugely laughed. Muggles can be so funny sometimes. Amen to that. And as far as the cord goes, we've deactivated the alarm around the death gate so that the ring of fire doesn't pop up. Instead, we'll just seal the door to the room before opening the death gate. Hugely pursed his lips, impressed. You've done a good job here, Mike. Let's head up to the control room and begin the mission. The two men headed up to the control room and turned on all the Muggle television monitors. Everything appeared to be in working order, and the cameras were broadcasting images of the closed door to the death gate. Hugely made sure that the entrance to the death chamber was sealed and opened the death gate. The door slid aside as Durant picked up the Muggle remote control device, got the flying carpet off the ground, and carefully flew it into the death gate. There weren't any spirits in the immediate vicinity, though Hugely suspected that they would investigate as soon as they could. Durant manipulated the remote control some more, and the carpet began to move away from the death gate on the far side. He turned the carpet around so that they could see where they had come from. They were surprised to find that spirits on the other side saw the same filmy curtain from Sheol that the Muggles did from the real world. Both men had thought that they should have been able to see into the lab. Well, apparently they had been mistaken. Durant looked at some of the equipment and whistled. Temperature is about 75 below 0 Fahrenheit. No wonder people die when they enter the gate. They freeze to death almost immediately. Air pressure is 320 millibars, about a third the pressure at Earth's surface. Most of the gas here appears to be methane, ammonia. Neon, this is weird stuff, Joe. Hugely wrote down some notes. Any oxygen? Not that we can detect. If the cold and low pressure didn't finish off people who stumbled in here, the lack of oxygen would. Do you see any land in the area? Not that I can tell. We can't see very far, though. Suddenly, a man's voice burst out from behind the probe. What is this? The two men stared at each other. The man had spoken in modern English. Durant suddenly thought for a second. Covering the microphone, he spoke quietly. This isn't as crazy as it seems. The world population was relatively low until recently, which means there is a surprisingly high probability that if a random dead person was contacted, he would have died within the past few hundred years. And you can probably guess what the most popular languages have been over the past century: English and Chinese. The fact that that woman spoke modern Malay also testifies to this. Hugely's eyes widened as he spoke into the microphone. Hello there, sir. How are you? The man hesitated for a moment, as if he hadn't expected this. Eventually, he replied, Good heavens, a machine which can talk. How curious. Durant spoke quickly in Durant's ear as he began turning the carpet around. I'm thinking 18th or 19th century. He isn't familiar with microphones and recording equipment. Sounds British or Canadian. The man continued to talk. Hello, Mr. Machine. Are you alive? If so, how did you get here? Are you a spirit of a dead machine? When you broke, did you come here? Hugely had to improvise. Actually, sir, this device is a machine which allows living people to explore your realm without dying. My name is Joseph Hugely, and I am contacting you from the town of Prescott, Massachusetts, in the United States of America. Today's date is August 30, 1996. The man whistled. Ingenious, sir, but not that surprising considering how fast technology has been advancing. I would like to speak with my descendants, if that is possible, and see how they are doing. My name is Bartholomew Sykes, and I was born and raised in Ottawa, Canada. I was born on June 4, 1832, and died on July 7, 1904. Do you by any chance know about me? You must know a lot in 1996. Durant bit his lip as the carpet continued to turn. I'm afraid I don't, Mr. Sykes. Technology is not as advanced as one might have thought. Tell me a little more about yourself. I was born in Ottawa and moved to New York after I got married in 1855. I worked as a shopkeeper for a couple of years before being called upon to serve my new homeland in the war against the Confederate States of America. I served in the 52nd New York Infantry Regiment and saw some action in the war. Hugely couldn't believe what he was hearing. This man was a Civil War vet. I saw horrors during this war that I do not wish to discuss, and many of the other veterans I have spoken with here agree that it was all a pointless waste of lives. I've even run into two men from my regiment who fell in battle, John Porter and Assad Johnson. I returned home in 1863 and continued to raise my family. I had 4 children, 3 of whom survived to adulthood. Their names were Elizabeth Sykes, Mary Sykes, and Irving Sykes. My store went under in 1877, at which point I worked as railroad technician. I was eventually promoted to manager and was responsible for laying many miles of track in the New York area and southern Canada. I retired in 1895 and spent the last few years of my life in the care of my wife, my 3 children, and my 10 grandchildren. I lived long enough to see Mary's eldest, Sarah, get married in 1901. Durrant looked at Hugely and whistled. If this guy had 10 grandchildren, he's got to have descendants who are still around. We've got to get these 2 together. Hugely waved him off impatiently and continued to talk. Mr. Sykes, this is the first time we have been able to interact with someone who has passed on. May we ask you a few questions? By this time, the carpet had made its full 180-degree rotation and was illuminating a blurry image of a short, bald man in 19th century dress. He wouldn't have looked out of place in a Civil War photograph. The man nodded. I will do my best to answer, but keep in mind that I am not a wise man. That's all I can ask, sir. What is death like? Sykes shrugged. I do not know, sir, as I died in my sleep. I fell asleep next to my wife, and when I next opened my eyes, I was here. Have you been able to contact God at all in Sheol? Sykes frowned. In what? Sheol, sir. That is the word we use for the location you are in right now. Sykes suddenly nodded. I recall the term from the Old Testament. Most of us here refer to it as purgatory, the world to come, the afterlife, hell, Hades, or heaven. However, Sheol also makes sense. At any rate, to answer your question, I have not been able to contact God in this location. However, I feel he is with me in that I have been privileged to be given the opportunity to speak once more with the world of the living. Were you a religious man? Sykes nodded. I went to church 2 or 3 Sundays a month to try ask guidance from him and to help recuperate from my experiences during the war. What denomination were you? Presbyterian. Are there people from all faiths here? Yes, sir. I have met Muslims, Jews, Hindus, pagans, and atheists. Everyone appears to come here. Do you know of any situations where a particularly righteous or evil person passed on and did not come here? Sykes shook his head. No, I do not. However, I cannot rule out the possibility that people go directly to the classical heaven or hell. Were you a wizard? Sykes blinked. A what? Wizard, sir. Someone who casts spells. Sykes looked amused. You mean to tell me that you have discovered magic in 1996? Most fascinating. Then again, it seems a logical extension of the ability to fly and the ability to use horseless carriages. Durrant spoke urgently in Hugely's ear. Joe, he died before the statute of secrecy fell. If he's a muggle, as appears to be the case, he doesn't know wizards exist. Hugely rolled his eyes and continued jotting down notes. Indeed, we have learned too many things in our time. Magic is just another of those things which is just coming over the horizon, similar to your horseless carriages and airplanes. I've got a couple of more questions. Have you ever wanted to come back to the real world and contact your descendants directly? Sykes's eyes widened. Are you saying you know how to reverse death as well? Most remarkable. Hugely laughed. I'm afraid death is still absolute, sir. However, have you tried to return to the world of the living at all? Of course, who wouldn't? How did that go? Sykes' face fell. I was unsuccessful. Either I did not know how to do it, or I could not make it through the black curtain. Black curtain. Sykes pointed at the death gate. A door such as this. I have heard stories about people crossing over, but they are few and far between. Really? How many people are able to return to the world of the living like this? Sykes thought for a moment. I would say roughly 1 in every 100. The reason I think they know something I do not is that when they go through the opening, they glow. I do not recall seeing people glow, though. Durant whistled. That was roughly the same ratio as the Q and Z genes, and the description on the spirit of the other side seemed a lot like that of a ghost. That could not be coincidence. Hugely had to cut the interview short. I'm sorry, Mr. Sykes, but I believe we have to go soon. Would you be willing to chat again at some point this week? If you want, we will see if we can find some of your descendants and have them visit. Sykes nodded quickly. I would like that very much, in fact. Until then, farewell. The spirit floated away as Hugely and Durant pulled the flying carpet and boxed back into the death chamber. The carpet somehow managed to make it back through completely intact. They were putting away the carpet when Durant suddenly realized something. Joe, do you realize that we're going to have to bring this guy's descendants into the Department of Mysteries for this? Hugely froze. Oops, I'll have to read up on Obliviation again. Eastern Pacific, north of Spedano. Flying over the rain clouds, the boat whizzed past a flock of seabirds, its fine-tuned repulsing charm slightly altering the flight path of those that otherwise would get too close. The boat belonged to Salmon Nastheros, exile of Círdan, citizen of Rattle, but it was a far cry from the improvised aircraft confiscated by the Cape Verde Ministry of Magic a month ago. This was the third such vehicle. The second one was hastily enchanted just like the first and sold after a week to a curious Lapitan. Sam's idea to buy Muggle goods at the Kodiak outpost, fly them to various hidden nations, and sell them there proved to be highly profitable, so they could afford the best of the best. To avoid any further run-ins with any sort of flight control, this boat was highly visible, painted bright red with a reflecting silver pattern and sporting a set of lights for night. And last, but not least, a wireless. The little magical radio, present in almost every wizarding household in the unhidden lands, was a rare commodity in the hidden nations. But now they not only could afford it, they had to. All three of them knew they already got lucky once when they didn't notice the Muggle flight control hailing them and telling they are about to collide with a fricking airplane. The wireless was on, but for the most time its only sound was statics. Not surprising, this far out above the ocean, but suddenly a voice began to speak. Myrtil, sunbathing on a rug spread over the deck, lazily reached out to turn the volume up. It was the newsreel, speaking in Gulliver, meaning they were getting close to their destination. In Northwest America, Matsu Bay and Nodo Island in Japan, Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky in the Russian Far East, Sur in Oman, Cape Town in South Africa, Lagos Lagoon in Nigeria, Rattle, and the affected Muggle governments announced the commissioning of 2 new trading outposts, this time in South America. The La Plata Delta facility will be shared between Argentina and Uruguay, and the Isla Puna outpost, itself in southern Ecuador, will also be a free trade zone open to Peru. The eldest voiced his best wishes for the cooperation between the nations, Rattle, and the local merpeople tribes. In other news, the Cape Verde Ministry of Magic announced a new patented magical solution for the protection of jet aircrafts. The spell combination offers a relief from the eternal fear of collision with birds and small particles, such as ash or sand, blocking the intakes, and even offers some countermeasures against collision with other aircraft. Just as much as the device's first test run a month ago nearly caused an accident, they hope this invention will ultimately help prevent an untold number of accidents. The crises of Howinghamland apparently reached another turning point yesterday, when the involvement of both Christian and communist Muggle agents were confirmed. Myrtle's head perked up as an idea occurred to her. Honey, how much do you think these Cape Verde guys would pay you if you went back and told them the repulsing charm is your invention? I mean, you can prove you did it first, with priori incantatem. That patent is rightfully yours. The wizard thought over it. Well, I suppose I could, and I would if I had no better ways to earn money. However, I think they added a lot to the spell. Last I checked, the version I used back then didn't include protection against flying ash. Also, the patent is not for the spell itself. It's for using it on Muggle jet aircraft. This I didn't do, ever. And even if they were willing to give me a share, that only goes after each piece of those aircrafts outfitted with that specific magic. And with magical flight no longer a secret, I don't see much of a future for those. It'd be better to patent the flying boat enchantment package, like those American girls did with the flying frigging carpets. But somehow, after more than a decade of living like a damned criminal, I'd rather earn my money as an honest merchant instead of claiming the ideas of long-dead great wizards and witches as my own. Now, what did it say about Howinghamland? Floppy the house, elf dutifully replied, that after 9 days from the ghost of the Prophet Samuel's summonings, Father Martinez excused himself from returning to him and claimed he can't abandon his flock in such dangerous times, lest their hearts are swayed by the false promises of communism or other heathens. Apparently, members of the Peruvian terrorist organization Shining Path have also gathered quite a following there, and the two groups are getting hostile. Also, there was an expert who guessed that the presence of these groups might be the prelude to a land grab by Muggle nations. Meanwhile, the rebellion's advance has come to a halt in the north and the east. Saying his thanks to the elf, Salmona looked forward at a strange cloud formation. Normal clouds stretched as far as their eyes have seen, but there was also a second, ghostly set of clouds, lifting as they used to when the sea wind hits mountains. And faintly visible under them, there were mountains, like a mirage first, but as they reached the point where the first ghost clouds appeared, they underwent a sudden change. The normal set of clouds disappeared, and the ghostly set became real, along with the mountains under it, their jagged edges and canyon wall towering only a few miles away. The land, wherever it was anything close to horizontal, was covered by lush rainforests, or the charred remains of those an obvious sign of dragon habitation. Speaking of which, the three travelers had the luck to witness a dragon catching a shark in the coastal waters. Seeing the fear crossing his girlfriend's face at the sight of the flying beast, the wizard told her, "Don't worry, little fruit. Dragons are slow to gain altitude, even without the burden of their prey. We only have to stay above the clouds and keep looking up, and we'll be perfectly safe." Then, as he spotted humans on brooms in the distance, he smiled reassuringly at Myrtle, and for the bazillionth time cast Sonorous on her. To their experience, Muggle crafts. Fine Muggle and Merpeople crafts, directly from Kodiak, spoken by the silky voice of the villa, was one of the most profitable thing to say when confronted by local border patrol and customs. Chapter 340. If you lose, bite the plaintiff. Saturday, August 31, 1996, Cooper household United Kingdom Harrison Cooper was having more and more trouble sleeping, and he doubted it was because of his recent transformation. The last few changes had been relatively benign, and he had spent most of his time either in windowless rooms or sleeping. The wolfsbane pill experiments were still going on. However, it was fairly obvious that the pill was working well enough for it to be endorsed by the British Ministry of Magic and the Emperor of Lugnag. All that was left was to determine if the preservatives needed to extend the life of the drug caused the werewolves to experience any additional medical side effects. Rumor had it that the invention of the wolfsbane pill had earned Severus Snape a nomination for the Nobel Prize in Medicine. Whether he would win, it was anyone's guess. The most exciting news in Animal House, as the new werewolves were calling it, was the fact that Lauren Mistry had gotten herself pregnant, and the scientists were placing bets as to whether the infant would be a wolf, human, or lycanthrope. Supposedly, it all depended on what time of the month the baby was conceived. Lauren had admitted that she couldn't remember when it had happened, so all of the options were on the table. The arrival of the moon rocks had thrown the entire medical establishment into a tizzy. Realizing that small amounts of the infectious agent could be helpful in creating vaccines, people were already clamoring for access to Linda Warren's moon rocks. NASA had supposedly nearly had apoplexy when the request had come in, and odds were that the request would be denied. Still, one could only hope. Harrison's primary concern involved his upcoming trial in the Dutch courts for the damages he had inflicted on his victims during his first transformation, back on the Nordum. Although he had no memory of the attacks, he had been told that he had attacked many people, including several of the people who were being held in Animal House. Even more worrisome was the fact that 3 people who had lost loved ones in the attack were trying him for murder. He had spoken with many of the people he had bitten and managed to convince most of them that he hadn't meant any harm. He had explained, under veritaserum, that he had not known that he was a werewolf prior to the attack. Yes, he had gotten sick a week before the full moon, but he and his wife had passed it off to mundane effects such as food poisoning and allergies. Hell, he hadn't even known that werewolves actually existed prior to the attack. It had never occurred to him that this monster, which had attacked him in the football stadium, had actually been a former Hogwarts professor. He had several lawyers on his side, both Muggle and wizarding. They suspected that the plaintiffs would concede that premeditated murder was likely not going to stick and consequently try to get him charged with involuntary manslaughter. If that happened, the lawyers advised him that it would likely stick. The attacks were indeed involuntary as he had no control of his actions at the time. If he were convicted of this, he would likely be facing a couple of years of prison time. Prison time in this case didn't make much sense, however. Prisons were designed as correctional facilities, and the inmates were supposed to be held there until the authorities considered them to have reformed enough to return to society. In Harrison's case, however, he didn't think he needed reforming. If anything, Snape's assistants had provided him the training he needed to return to society. He didn't need prison time. He looked at his wife, whose pregnancy was most definitely showing now. The most recent estimate of her due date was November 18, and as far as the doctors could tell, everything was developing according to plan. Although the wizards had assured him that he couldn't transmit the werewolf genes to Courtney or the baby through anything other than a bite, he had been playing it safe ever since he had first found out about his condition. As a result, he had convinced his wife to abstain from relations in the week prior to his transformation. As far as the civil damages went, the wizards suspected that the fines and penalties would be steep. Many people had been bitten, and several of them still refused to talk to him. However, there were rumors that the British Ministry of Magic would pay most, if not all, of the fine. After all, he had only found himself in a position to harm those people on the boat, because the ministry had been negligent in their abilities to track him down on the boat. There was nothing anyone could do at this point, however. What was done, and all he could do was wait Headmaster's office Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Amelia Bell flinched as the staircase leading to the headmaster's tower suddenly began pushing her up towards the ceiling. A few minutes later, she found herself in Dumbledore's office, where the headmaster greeted her with Severus Snape in tow. Amelia nodded to the headmaster. "You wish to see me, Professor Dumbledore?" Dumbledore nodded. "Indeed I have, Amelia. How have your lesson plans been going? Do you think you're going to be able to teach the class?" Amelia nodded. "I think so, Professor. Megan gave me some of her notes, and she told me about some of the students. At the very least, I'll be able to start with Muggle England. I know my own culture pretty well, after all." "Indeed you do, Amelia. I'm sure you'll do fine. If it's any consolation, you seem at least as competent as Megan was, and the students loved her." Amelia blushed. "I hope I can fill her shoes, Professor. Speaking of the students, I have heard rumors that King William will be attending Hogwarts this year. Is this true?" Dumbledore nodded. "Indeed, he is. To the best of my knowledge, he is going to be the first reigning monarch, let alone curly wizard, to attend Hogwarts. If he makes it through his first year, we'll think about keeping him here all 7 years. Be advised that he will be exempted from Muggle studies, so you won't have to teach him." Amelia nodded. "I understand, sir. To be honest, I wasn't sure what I was going to do if I had to teach him. I mean, I grew up with Elizabeth as queen, not Laura. I don't think I'd be comfortable treating him like any other student. I couldn't imagine the amount of trouble I'd get into by accidentally killing the King of England. His Majesty is going to in very safe hands. There are going to be several British secret agents in Hogwarts as long as William is here, including several experienced SAS men. They will be armed with Muggle weapons, and only with Muggle weapons, and they will not interfere with his studies unless he finds himself in a life-threatening scenario, which the rest of the teachers are going to try to avoid." Dumbledore then stared at her hard. "The issue of the king's security and that of the students in general is the reason I have brought you here. It's going to be a formality, to be sure, but you should at least know about it." Amelia frowned. "What's going on?" Dumbledore explained. "As you may or may not be aware, one of Voldemort's agents, a man named Bartemius Crouch Jr., was able to neutralize and impersonate one of our staff members a couple of years ago. We had hired Alastair Moody to teach defense against the dark arts, but Mr. Crouch incapacitated him and took his place for the semester. Crouch did a very good job, studying Moody well enough to completely fool the staff. Thinking himself beyond suspicion, he rigged the Triwizard Tournament so that Harry Potter would win and transport himself to Little Hangleton to serve as an unwilling accomplice in Voldemort's return. Because of Crouch's subterfuge, Voldemort was able to return and begin his takeover of the world." Snape handed her a bizarre, yellow drink which smelled horrible. "Miss Bell, we have changed the security policies of this school when it comes to new teachers. When it comes to existing teachers, we're counting on their experience and our familiarity with their mannerisms to ensure that people do not impersonate them like they did Professor Moody. With new people, however, we realize that we have no way to tell if you indeed are Amelia Bell or someone impersonating her. To prevent people from impersonating you, we demand that you drink this potion." Amelia looked at it warily. "What is it?" "This potion will counter the effects of Polyjuice Potion, a draft used by evildoers and spies to impersonate other people. If someone under the Polyjuice Potion were to consume this drink, it would cause them to revert back to their original form, so we would be able to catch them. If you aren't using the Polyjuice Potion, it will have no effect. Now, be a good girl and drink this up." Amelia took a few sips and nearly threw up. "Bar, it tastes awful. Do I have to drink all of it?" Both wizards nodded. Bracing herself, she shook her head in disbelief and drank it all down. The wizards looked at her for a few minutes. Seeing that she wasn't turning into a frog or anything like that, Snape shook her hand. "You see, nothing happened. It's just a formality for a security protocol. I apologize for the taste, but that's the best we can do." Dumbledore continued. "You'll get a couple of spot checks, roughly once every other month or so. They'll be unannounced, so if people do try to impersonate you, which I doubt will happen, we'll be able to get them. Rest assured that you won't have to drink that again until at least November." Amelia barely heard the last sentence as she was busy at the water fountain trying to get the bad taste out of her mouth. How the hell did these students take a potions class without killing themselves, or at the very least their taste buds? Chapter 341. The Sorting Hat and the King. Monday, September 2, 1996, Platform 9, 34 King's Cross, Station London, United Kingdom. The first thing Harry Potter noticed when he first boarded the train was that there were many fewer students than last year. The reason was painfully obvious. They had been killed when Voldemort's surprise had detonated in the Ministry of Magic. The Pattle twins were gone, Dean Thomas was no more, and Colin Creevey, he of the Muggle camera, had also been killed. Hermione could have very easily been killed herself had she not taken quick and decisive action after the bomb had gone off. Rumors were spreading that Susan Bones had been forced to withdraw from the school because her mother, who had been the family breadwinner, had been killed in the blast, and the Boneses were having trouble paying the tuition. And that had just been Gryffindor. All four houses had been affected, even Slytherin. No one had come away unscathed. King's Cross Station had been repaired quickly after the bombs had gone off and was back in business. Platform 934 hadn't been touched, thanks to the fact that the portal connecting it to the rest of the station had been closed at the time of the blast. The students had headed over there, as they had done for so many years. For the first time in a long time, Harry was not the center of attention. That privilege had gone to King William, who was sitting in his booth on the train along with Ron, Ginny, and Hermione. The compartment was surrounded by paparazzi, both Muggle and wizarding. He caught a brief glimpse of Rita Skeeter in her bug form perched on the window and had to convince Hermione and William not to swat her. He had passed J.K. Rowling in the corridor, where she had been gawking at some of the bizarre foods on the trolley. Ron looked at the king in disbelief. "I must confess, Your Majesty, I never thought I'd see the King of England actually attending Hogwarts. Are you sure you know what you're in for?" William nodded. "Snape told my mother, who relayed everything to me. My mother tried to talk me out of it, but I told her I thought I could handle it. It looks like I'm going to be given special training by the Witch Queen and some Korean chap." Harry blinked at him. "The Witch Queen? Who's the Witch Queen?" Hermione explained. "You know how the wizarding Romanovs and Habsburgs came out and offered to serve as ceremonial Muggle co-rulers? Britain was like that as well. There was a line of wizarding royals similar to the Romanovs and Habsburgs. William here had a colleague he didn't know about, a woman named Laura Spencer. Her Majesty has offered to help train William." William looked at her in confusion. "My grandmother did what?" Hermione mentally kicked herself. "Oh, I'm sorry, William. I keep on forgetting that when you think Her Majesty, you think Elizabeth. You're going to have to start getting accustomed to that." William rolled his eyes. "I'm barely accustomed to being king at this point, which reminds me, I also need to start getting familiar with all these bizarre treats on that trolley. How can people eat those all-flavor beans? The first few I tried tasted like liver and tripe. Do wizards have different taste buds, which make those things taste good?" Ron looked at William and handed over a chocolate frog. "You just got bad luck, Your Majesty. Try the chocolate frogs. They're much more reliable." Curious, William accepted the chocolate frog and opened the box. He nearly dropped it as a brown frog suddenly leaped out of the box and scurried for the window. William pointed at the creature. "What the bloody hell was that? Is it something that prankster brother of yours concocted?" Harry chuckled when he realized how much William still had to learn. "It's a chocolate frog, Your Majesty." "You turn frogs into chocolate." Ron looked at Harry. Indeed, he does have a lot to learn. Hogsmeade Station. Hidden under her invisibility cloak, Halina Zyganova watched from a half-open broom closet as the Hogwarts Express pulled into the station. The platform was packed with reporters and well-wishers. She could barely make out Wilhelmina Grubblyplank in the mob, who had been assigned to accompany the first-year students to the boats. Cameras began to flash as the students got off the train. The sight of Harry, Ron, Hermione, and William getting off together proved to be an irresistible draw, and at least 3/4 of the reporters took 5 or 6 pictures of them. Zyganova was fairly certain that this photograph was going to appear in every single Muggle magazine in Britain. She wondered if any of the Muggles would even recognize their king in wizard's robes. The king had apparently managed to secure a dwarf hippogriff named Silver Moth as his familiar. How that had happened, Zygonova didn't know. She could have sworn that dwarf hippogriffs were somewhat endangered and endemic to the island of Lilliput. Then again, she could have been mistaken. She caught movement out of the corner of her eye and saw one of the reporters heading to the ladies' room. This woman seemed to be close enough to her height and figure for her to try to impersonate. Making sure the polyjuice potion was close at hand and the invisibility cloak was secure around her, she crept out of the broom closet and followed her into the bathroom. She could only hope that the reporter had the whole ladies' room to herself. As a matter of fact, she didn't. There were 3 other women visible in plain view at the time, and she could tell there were people in the stalls. It sounded as if she would have to improvise a little. Pointing her wand at the door to the reporter's stall, she whispered a spell which would jam the lock. That would make sure that she would be the last person out. In addition, she conjured a sign saying lavatory closed and sent it outside the bathroom. That would prevent people from coming in. All she had to do now was wait. J. K. Rowling cursed when she found the door had jammed. Of all times for something to malfunction, it had to be now. She really wanted to capture footage of King William entering Hogwarts and being sorted into a house. She banged on the door, trying to get out. A couple of people cast spells at the door to try to open it, yet for some reason they didn't work. Telling her to sit tight, they told her that they were going to go and see if they can get help. Within a few seconds, she was alone in the bathroom. She was wondering how long it would take for help to arrive when she heard movement nearby. It appeared to be near the door, yet she couldn't see who made it. She breathed a sigh of relief she'd be out of here soon. Then she heard a woman whisper an odd word. Somnolence. She suddenly felt very tired and decided that this toilet stall would be a good place to take a nap. Making sure that the reporter was asleep and had been obliviated, Zygonova undid the charm locking the stall door and walked into the stall with the reporter. She pulled some tufts of hair from the woman's head and dropped them into the polyjuice potion, which promptly began to fizz. Bracing herself for the transformation, Zygonova knocked it down. 30 seconds later, she found herself in J.K. Rowling's body. She had to work quickly before anyone else showed up trying to force the door. She hurriedly undressed, put on the reporter's clothes, and picked up her camera. Zygonova hoped she knew how to use it, and pressed pass. She managed to wrap the reporter's body and Zygonova's old clothes in the invisibility cloak, just as the door of the bathroom opened, and someone called in. "Hello, in there. I've been told that the door is stuck. Stand back, I'll let you out." Hoping that the polyjuice potion would capture the reporter's voice, she called the woman off. "I got it open, ma'am. Don't worry about it. I'll be done in a second." The intruder nodded. "Good to hear that, ma'am. I just hope you don't get trampled by the people about to come in. There's a bit of a line now that the lavatory is back in business." Zygonova looked through a crack in the door as she saw no fewer than 7 women walk into the bathroom. This would be tricky, she thought. She would be able to get out fine by herself. The problem lay in the fact that she needed to get the real J.K. Rowling's body out of there and back in the broom closet before she woke up. It looked as if she was going to have to try out the Reducio charm. The charm worked, like a charm. Grinning, she put the sleeping J.K. Rowling in J.K. Rowling's own purse and opened the door. 3 women stared at her. Bloody hell, it's J.K. Rowling, the Muggle columnist and reporter. Hurry up, they're about to send William off in the boats. That was all Zygonova needed to hear. Telling everyone to get out of her way, she raced out of the bathroom and joined the gaggle of reporters following Wilhelmina Grubblyplank. The woman was shouting, "First years this way," and herding a bunch of little kids off towards the boats. One of the kids was significantly taller than the others, and he had a very excited look on his face. The height advantage was exacerbated somewhat by the fact that a good 30% of the other kids were constantly bowing to him. She didn't know how long the Reducio charm would last. She needed to put J.K. Rowling somewhere before it ran out. But where? King William followed Professor Grubblyplank over to the shores of a large lake, where a fleet of small boats awaited the first-year students. There was a brief moment of confusion when they tried to figure out how exactly they were going to fit William into a boat with two other students after all. He was significantly taller and heavier than the standard 11-year-olds. Eventually, they all made it into the boats. The herbology professor, what did she teach? Gardening. Tapped her boat with her wand, and William gaped as the boats started making their way across the lake under their own power. As far as he could tell, there was nothing propelling the boats. He looked for a motor but couldn't find any, and he certainly didn't see any sails. This had to be magic, he thought, and he definitely wanted to study the phenomenon. However, he knew enough to not try standing up in a boat, which looked like it could tip over at any moment. One of the other students in the boat spoke up. "The boats are powered by magic, my friend. You seem really tall, by the way. What's your name, and why is everyone bowing to you? Are you Harry Potter? I heard he goes here." William was barely able to prevent himself from reacting. "I'm William the, King of England. I just found out that I may have magic ability, so I decided to start lessons this year." The little girl giggled. "Ooh, cool, you're a king. Can you cut people's heads off whenever you want? My name's Patricia Prince, and I was wondering if you could cut off my brother's head. He's really obnoxious." William chuckled. "In theory, yes. In practice, it doesn't happen. Besides, I doubt that whatever he did is enough for warrant getting rid of him. How familiar are you with Hogwarts, Patricia?" Patricia giggled some more. "Well, my dad's cousin teaches potions." William thought for a moment. That would be Severus Snape or Horace Slughorn, if I remember correctly. "Yup, it's Professor Snape. Most of my family has been in Slytherin, and I think I'm going to be there as well." William smiled. "Well, best of luck to you, and see what you can do to have the teachers put you in Slytherin. You'll probably find it easier to work with staff members who know your relatives." Now both of the girls in the boat with her started chuckling. "No, silly. William, the teachers don't tell you which house you're in. The hat does." William blinked as the boat made its way around a bend in the lake. How is a hat supposed to wow? William's mouth clamped shut as he saw Hogwarts Castle for the first time. It looked as if it had been taken right out of a children's fantasy novel or a medieval painting. It had 4 huge towers, and he could see evidence that someone was trying to build a 5th in a hurry. Patricia, who apparently was familiar with the layout of school, nodded. "Impressive, isn't it? That 5th tower is going to be the future home of Black House, the house dedicated to wizards who want to help Muggles. It's going to be admitting its first students next year." William smiled. "Maybe I can be part of that house. I have wizarding ability, and I need to be a king for both Muggles and wizards. Would that be a good match, or what?" Patricia thought for a moment. "Probably. Unfortunately, the building isn't ready yet, and once you're put in a house, you stay there for 7 years. Had you come in 1 year later, you'd have been put in black. Unfortunately, I don't think that will be an option for you unless people are allowed to move into black at the beginning of next year." The boats made their way across the lake and came to rest on the far side, near the entrance to the castle. Professor Grubblyplank told everyone to leave the boats and line up outside the front door in alphabetical order by last name. It took them a while, but they eventually all got lined up. The doors opened momentarily, and William caught a brief glimpse of a candlelit hall filled with students. He watched as Snape emerged from the hall and addressed the new students. "Welcome to Hogwarts. I'm Deputy Headmaster Severus Snape, and it is my duty to inform you that as new students, you will be required to participate in a ceremony which will sort you into one of 5 houses: Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, Black, and Gryffindor. This will ensure that you will be placed with students with similar interests and motivations. When I give the signal, you will all walk into the Great Hall and stand quietly as I call your names and place the sorting hat upon your head. The sorting hat will examine your motivations and choose the correct house for you." Note that the sorting ceremony will be a bit unusual this year due to the addition of Black House to the school roster and the fact that Black House will not officially open until the 1997-1998 school year. If you are sorted into Black House, the sorting hat will ask you to choose a temporary house for you to live in until construction of the Black House Tower is complete. This secondary house can be chosen for you by the sorting hat, or you can request a house for yourself. At the beginning of next year, you will be asked to move out of your temporary house and into Black House. Each house has its own personality and house ghost. Black House is dedicated to wizards who wish to help Muggles, and at present there is no house ghost for it. You are probably all familiar with the traditional 4 houses, so I don't need to get into them. Snape glanced back over his shoulder into the main hall and nodded. All right, first years. Follow me in and stay in line until your name is called. Once your name is called and the sorting hat has chosen your house, sit at the table with the rest of the people in your house. If you have been assigned to Black House, sit at the table associated with your secondary house. Snape pushed the doors wide open, and William followed him into a huge room filled with candles hovering in midair and things, which looked like ghosts talking with the students. There were 4 long tables on the floor filled with students, and the front of the room was highlighted by a 5th table occupied by staff members. The king recognized Dumbledore at the front of the room, standing at a podium. Dumbledore waved at the first years and handed Snape an old hat. Snape glanced at a sheet of parchment and stopped the procession in front of a small stool. He then called out a name, Adams Madison. A small blonde girl walked up to the stool and sat down. Snape put the hat upon her head, and it announced its verdict, Hufflepuff. One of the tables cheered, presumably the Hufflepuff one, and the girl walked over there and sat down. The next person to be sorted was Benson Frederick. He was assigned to Black House, but was temporarily placed in Ravenclaw. The Ravenclaw table cheered as he headed over. The sorting ceremony took a while. William was pleased to see that Patricia Prince was indeed placed in Slytherin. The line dwindled, and eventually there were 2 people left, a redhead named Pamela Woody and William himself. Snape looked at the next name on the list, Windsor William. Cameras flashed, and several people came to their feet as William headed over and sat down the chair. Snape put the hat upon his head, and William nearly fell over when he heard the hat start talking to him. Let's see here. You seem really brave, and you also have a lot of the characteristics of Muggles. To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever seen anyone like you before. William chuckled. No, Hat, I doubt you have. I didn't think so, young man. At any rate, you sound like you would be a good candidate to be someone who would like to help Muggles. Am I right? William nodded. I sure hope so, Hat. I'm their king. The Hat seemed surprised. I apologize, Your Majesty. I didn't realize that. I think black would suit you very well in that case. That's settled. Now it comes time for your secondary house. Most of the royal family I've sorted over the past few centuries. William nearly fell over when he heard that were placed in Hufflepuff. You're very brave, however, so I can't figure out whether you should go in Hufflepuff or Gryffindor. Do you have a preference? William looked at the Gryffindor table, where he saw Hermione looking at him. Gryffindor, if you don't mind. The Hat agreed. Sound good to me. Halina Zyganova wasn't really interested in King William, yet she couldn't help but wonder which house the British monarch would wind up. Virtually the entire room was staring at the sorting hat. The sorting hat announced its verdict. Black House, with Gryffindor as a temporary residence. The Gryffindor table erupted, and cameras flashed as the king made his way to the Gryffindor table. There was a bit of confusion, as he couldn't seem to decide whether to sit with the first years or Hermione. Eventually, Hermione and her friends helped him make the decision by moving to sit closer to the first years. Pamela Woody was sorted into Slytherin, and Snape picked up the hat and stool and removed them from the room. He then took his position at the head table. If Dumbledore was true to form, he would now give his speech. and introduce any new teachers. Dumbledore tapped his wand on the podium and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hogwarts. I would like to begin this meal with a moment of silence to commemorate members of our community, both Muggle and Wizarding, who died in Lord Voldemort's attack on London. The room was silent for a few minutes, after which Dumbledore continued. The attack on London is just one of the many ways in which the world has changed over the past 12 months. As you are undoubtedly aware, the Statute of Secrecy suffered an irreparable breach when footage of a wizard managed to be broadcast to the Muggle world during a popular Muggle sporting event back in January. The Muggles found out about our world, and for the first time in centuries, we had to deal with Muggle interference and intervention. The merging of the Muggle and Wizarding worlds is far from complete. However, it is obvious that some changes have taken place for the better and for the worse. Combinations of Muggle and Wizarding abilities have allowed for exploration of the moon, transportation revolutions among the Muggles, and great strides in medicine. Unfortunately, the two disciplines have merged to produce more sinister applications as well, not the least of which is the ability to use portkeys to deliver weapons to their targets using almost unblockable methods. It is the goal of this school to produce students able to function in both the Muggle and Wizarding worlds. Voldemort may be gone and the Death Eaters destroyed, but we cannot let down our guard. Only time will tell if another dark wizard will emerge among us. Zygonova watched as Dumbledore continued his speech. He was a pretty good speaker, she admitted. Eventually, he reached the end of his talk and began introducing the head table. We have several new teachers this year and several reassignments of teachers to different positions. We'll introduce the new teachers first in alphabetical order. To my left here is Amelia Bell, our new Muggle Studies teacher. She will be replacing Megan Baldwin this year due to a family emergency in the Baldwin household. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Bell. Zygonova looked at the woman Dumbledore was pointing at, who was waving her hand at the crowd. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, was a little chubby, and had bright red hair. She would be quite noticeable and easy to pick out in a crowd. Her mission was complete. She now knew whom to impersonate to get close to Dumbledore. Hoping that the Polyjuice potion wouldn't run out, and that J.K. Rowling wouldn't revert to her normal size, she waited through the rest of the introductions, and then headed out of the Great Hall as the students began their meal. She eventually headed into a spare bathroom, brought the reporter out of her bag, and reverted her to her normal size. She then handed over the camera, which thankfully she had managed to operate, and the reporter had ensured would work in the presence of magic, and magically transported all she had seen into Rowling's head. If everything went as planned, Rowling would wake up thinking she had been in the Great Hall the whole time, and the camera had recorded everything. Zygonova didn't have anything against Rowling personally, after all, and figured that woman deserved to have something to report. Zygonova cast the countercharm to wake Rowling up and put it on a delay to make sure that Zygonova got the invisibility cloak on and made it out of the bathroom before the reporter woke up. Once this was done, she headed back to the Great Hall. The next thing she had to do was to wait until Alastair Moody was distracted by something, hopefully his food, before she could leave the castle. Harry's interviews had reported that he could see through invisibility cloaks and out the back of his head. Eventually, she saw her chance when Moody found himself talking to Dumbledore, and the route she had to take to get from her section of the hall to the entrance was blocked from Moody's sight by other students. Trying to act nonchalantly, she made her way out of the Great Hall and returned to Hogsmeade. Piece of cake. All she had to do now was to pick up Amelia Bell on the way home from the feast, Polyjuice into her, and sneak back into the school without the invisibility cloak the next day. Hinhim after a month of rainfall, the sun finally emerged from beyond the clouds over the capital of Howinghamland. The city of Hinhinham was built 8 centuries ago to signify the peace and fresh start brought by the unification. It was built with trade and large gatherings in mind, with no significant fortifications, no one ever expecting a war to reach it. Consequently, when war did reach it, the city fell in a day, with most of the population electing to flee rather than stay and fight, and thus the city was remarkably intact, with the exception of a few sites of resistance, such as the bullet-torn presidential palace. Here and there, more recent damage spoiled the landscape, the result of invisible wizards flying over and taking potshots, sometimes with fiendfire or dropping salvaged Muggle explosives. Secondary fires, started by the ashwinders born from the magical fires, aggravated the situation. This threat was greatly reduced a few days ago, when a Muggle technician rigged up a radar system and a grid pattern, enabling makeshift R crews to take down the infiltrators in a hail of lead poured in their general direction, overwhelming magical barriers. The bullet-ridden remains of the mages were often too damaged, but they were still able to identify a few of them, mostly Seodani, and salvage some wands. It was a pity the invisibility cloaks were always ruined by the bullet holes and the splattering bodily fluids. After 1,000 years of living in a magical society that didn't allow them to learn magic, the Yahoos were overjoyed by the prospect of being able to do so. Following the rumors from the Muggle world, people no longer accepted that being a wizard required the ability to see magic, and with no lack of volunteers, despite the touch of a wand hurt like hell if you happen to be a Muggle, they soon found dozens of half-wizards wishing to learn magic. Finding tutors had been more tricky, but thankfully, some of the Yahoo revolutionary groups had the foresight to hire foreign wizards to help them in their struggle, and while they were no professional teachers, they could share some of their knowledge of spells and runes. The runes were very popular. Even Muggles could carve them, then have a half-wizard to power them up. By now, virtually all the buildings in the city were warded by simple but reasonably effective magic. Narrowly escaping numerous strafing runs by wizards, Father Martinez had conflicting feelings about magic. On the one hand, he had seen it used to destroy, and it was horrible. On the other hand, even he admitted that supplying the rebel army or the civilians would have been much harder without charms, and it was hard to think ill of these poor souls, oppressed for 1,000 years, and now saving his life by carving a ward on the roof under which he rests. Also, some of their innocent questions momentarily had him doubt his own faith. After some awkwardness, he managed to concentrate on the message of love and equality by Jesus, not the miracles associated with him. Feeding a whole crowd with only a handful of fish and bread seemed like the everyday routine in these parts now. But then he remembered that the real message was not power, but peace, mercy, kindness, charity, forgiveness, and compassion. The Yahoos liked that, too, even the parts about forgiveness and mercy. While some of them committed brutal acts of retribution on their former overlords, those were a small but vocal minority. Most of them were tired of war and were open-minded enough to accept the solution he seemed to offer. Of course, converting the Yahoos wasn't without difficulties. He faced a serious dilemma with the centaurs. Some of them were siding with the rebels, and they appeared to have souls just like humans. But appearances may be deceiving, and he didn't find anything about them in the Bible. He also couldn't run for his superiors for an answer, as they were fully caught up in the power struggle resulting from the return of the alleged prophet Samuel of the Old Testament, a creature he did not trust. After all, why did this ghost return only now, and not earlier, when the schisms and heresies plaguing the church could have been easily stopped before they truly began? His brooding was interrupted by the sound of explosions and panicked screams. It looked like the enemy wizards have come back for another round. He looked up uneasily at the roof. It was a simple thing, built of wood and ceramic tiles to keep the wind and the rain out. He knew their fireproofing runes carved in the support beams and some other wards offering generic protection, but still, it seemed uncomfortably thin. He heard a series of popping sounds. The ones he learnt meant wizard teleportation, then a heavy, clattering thunk on the flat roof, followed by the grating sound of rigid objects rolling on each other. Patches of sunlight entered the room as the tiles were cracked, but there was no other apparent damage. He blew out a breath in relief. Then all of a sudden, the world exploded, and he blacked out. Same house, outside. Lurking in the shadows under his invisibility cloak, Zaphareth jumped into cover when he heard the sound of incoming Portkey grenade clusters and casted the most powerful shielding charm he could. When dealing with Muggle explosives, there was no such thing as using too much defense. Seconds later, explosions rocked the nearby streets as hundreds of Geminioed grenades, Portkey dozens of feet above Hinhinham, fell from the sky and exploded at the same moment. As the dust began to settle, he surveyed the damage. The shack where his sources said the priest rested was badly damaged by a direct hit. While some of the grenades rolled down and exploded on the ground, their blast largely absorbed by the brick walls, some got lodged in the roof and showered the neighborhood with shattered ceramics and shrapnel. Any guards standing nearby were gutted or torn apart, leaving no witnesses. Quickly entering, he saw the interior didn't fare better. As he cast Revelio Hominum, he saw the priest was the only living human in the building, and barely. The Kevlar vest his followers insisted he wears protected his torso, but his legs were trapped beneath fallen debris, and a vicious-looking splinter sticked out of his neck. The merwizard hurried over to kneel at the padre's side, as he hurriedly casted a few diagnostic spells. They revealed that the splinter narrowly missed the carotid artery and pushed against it in a way that partially blocked the blood flow, hence the lack of consciousness. The human's legs weren't in better shape either, with only the crushing weight keeping the open fractures from causing critical blood loss. Noting the delicate state of the halfway caved-in roof, he cautiously levitated the pile of rubble up, and when nothing happened, pushed it aside. Then he quickly healed the damaged bone, muscles, veins, and skin on the human's leg. As well as he could on short notice, he had to replace some of the debris to imitate a less severe injury. He decided, unsatisfied with his work there. Lastly, he removed the splinter from the priest's neck and healed that wound. Blinking dizzy, Father Martinez opened his eyes and took in the silhouette of a man in plain clothes and a worried expression looking around, then pointing a wand at him and uttering something Latin. Then he felt like blacking out again. Only this time, it was like taking the back seat in his own body. He waved and flailed and shouted, but his body was unresponsive. Pointing the wand at him again, the stranger whispered in his ears in Spanish, "Don't struggle in vain, Padre. Fear not, I'm not your enemy, and it will soon appear to be obvious for you. I will even let you go freely, with just a few suggestions." A blink of an eye or an eternity has passed when other Spanish voices filtered in from outside. "Comrade Vasquez, say something. Where are you?" The man hurriedly tucked away a discarded cloak of strange silvery matter and shoved the wand into a concealed sheath in his sleeves. All this seemed perfectly okay and unworthy of remembering for Martinez. Then the stranger yelled back, "In here! Cautiously, the house is badly damaged. Help me taking this man out." 3 others entered and looked at their comrade, and the incredibly lucky man who got off by having some light part of the roof falling onto his legs, when all around him, deadly shrapnel and splinters were embedded in the wall. Then, looking closer, one of them recognized the tattered priest's robes on the Kevlar vest and stared quizzically at Comrade Vasquez. The undercover merwizard stared back sternly and spoke in a voice that did not tolerate objection, but at least promised an explanation later. "Help me free Father Martinez. We are returning him to his flock." Chapter 342. Neville likes Amelia. Amelia likes Draco. Monday, September 2, 1996, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizards United Kingdom next up. Nerd witch teacher Amelia Bell looked over the class of 6th years. Some of the boys were in fact cute, particularly that blonde one in the corner. She had to forcibly remind herself that these were not only her students, but they were underage to boot. This class combined students from both Slytherin, and Gryffindor, and as usual the Slytherins sat separately from whomever they were sharing the class with. She didn't really understand why everyone seemed to hate the Slytherins. Granted, the Slytherins tended to be loudmouths who bullied other students and looked down upon people of Muggle birth. However, not all of them were like that. Snape and Slughorn had both been members of Slytherin, and they had been excellent school officials. She picked up a piece of chalk and began pointing things out on the blackboard. All right, guys, that's the end of the course syllabus, and now that we've got some time at the end of the class, we can start teaching you about Muggle culture. We'll start with the culture you know best, Muggle Britain. She chuckled. In case you haven't found out by now, the British Muggles have a king, William V of the House of Windsor. One of the Slytherins raised his hand. I thought he was in Black House. Amelia stifled a laugh. The House of Windsor in this case refers to the fact that his family comes from a clan whose last name is Windsor. Well, it was recently changed to Windsor. A girl in the front of the room raised her hand and cut in. From Hanover at the time of the First Muggle World War, because the Germans were England's enemies at the time, and it didn't seem right to have someone with a German name ruling the British people. Amelia whistled. That's right, young lady. What's your name and which house are you from? The girl smiled her. Hermione Granger, Professor Bell. I'm from Gryffindor. 5 points to Gryffindor, Miss Granger, I'm impressed. Then again, I've heard several amazing things about you. You're supposedly very bright, and you were responsible for the defensive shield around that dental office after the bomb went off. Is that true? Hermione blushed and nodded. That was I, Professor. However, I couldn't have saved the world all by myself. I had a lot of help. Amelia nodded. I'm sure. I can tell that you're going to be an asset to both the wizarding and Muggle communities when you get out of this school. In the meantime, though, let's continue on with the history lesson. The British nation is headed by a king, though he hasn't really had much real power since the Magna. Hermione cut in again. Carta was signed back in the 13th century. Amelia laughed. 5 more points to Gryffindor, Miss Granger. You definitely seem to know your stuff. However, if you don't mind, let's have some of the other people chime in at this point and see if they have any questions. If you want to talk about stuff that's more advanced than one would expect for a wizard newly exposed to the Muggle world, you may want to wait until after the class. Hermione frowned a moment, then shrugged and sat down again. Meanwhile, the blond boy in the corner chuckled and muttered something to one of his classmates. Amelia called on him. You in the corner, please don't talk in class. I know I may be boring from time to time, but like it or not, you're going to have to learn to deal with Muggles now that the statute of secrecy is down, and they're likely going to start giving Muggles tour of Hogwarts one of these days. What's your name, my blonde friend? Draco Malfoy, Professor. Amelia nodded. I recognize the name, Mr. Malfoy. You're Professor Snape's adopted son, right? He told me about you. Yes, Professor. I thought so, Mr. Malfoy. In that case, you may want to be extra careful in your studies. You don't want to do something foolish in the presence of a Muggle and have your faux pas ruin your father's reputation. For all we know, he could lose his job because he insulted a Muggle. I've already had to take points from Slytherin because Snape's cousin's daughter, a first year, misbehaved in class. He wasn't all that happy, but he agreed that it had to be done. Virtually, the entire room started murmuring at that, and Amelia was stunned to watch Malfoy's jaw drop halfway to the floor. She told everyone to be quiet, but it didn't do much good. She eventually had to threaten to start taking points away in order to bring the class back to order. This particular group of students had several famous people in it. In addition to Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy, Harry Potter was there as well. He admitted that he had been the wizard seen in the Super Bowl breach, and that no one in the convoy from 4 Privet Drive had had any intent of exposing the wizarding world to the Muggles. Had it not been for that soft drink company filming that Super Bowl commercial on the boat, The wizards would almost certainly still be hidden from not just Amelia, but from the rest of the world, as well. Harry liked the new Muggle studies teacher. She, like Professor Baldwin, was much more laid back than most of the other teachers. Furthermore, since she was also no more than 26 or 27, she could relate to the students much more than the older instructors. Neville Longbottom had spent a good 5 minutes complaining he had a crush on her, something that Harry fervently hoped would not reach the ears of Hannah Abbott, Luna Lovegood, or any of the teachers. He looked at Ron and giggled. "What do you think, Ron? Do you think she's related to you?" Ron shook his head fervently. "I don't think so, Harry. Yes, she's got red hair, but how many Muggles in Britain have red hair? Besides, if one of our relatives wound up going to a Muggle graduate school, we would have likely heard about it." Ron rounded on Hermione. "You're lucky she didn't take points from you for not raising your hand in class. Remember what happened with Umbridge." Hermione sniffed. "This woman is not Umbridge. She's probably a third Umbridge's age and 3 times her height. Bloody hell, if Umbridge even heard that she was in this school, she'd probably try to have her expelled." Harry laughed. "She's going to be an interesting teacher. I found her talk with Draco hilarious. She has no idea that Draco's father hated Muggles and Muggleborns, and she has no idea that Draco himself is a reformed Death Eater." Ron grunted. "Reformed Death Eater. Considering his muttering with Crabbe and Goyle, I'm not convinced." Harry rolled his eyes. "He talks with Crabbe and Goyle all the time, and we know that he doesn't like Hermione. As far as I can tell, he's reformed, and I don't see how he'll be able to stray very far living in the same house, both inside school and outside it, as Snape." Ron frowned. "Unless Snape defects and starts throwing dark marks around, I've never really trusted him." Hermione threw her hands up. "Snape defect? Defect to whom? Voldemort's dead, and the Death Eaters are in ruins. If Snape were to defect, he would be captured and killed in an instant." Ron thought back to the class. "Speaking of Snape, who's this first-year belle was talking about?" Harry answered that. "That's Patricia Prince, a new Slytherin. Apparently King William and she became friends on the boat ride over here. She doesn't seem all that bad, according to William. He doesn't get much of a chance to talk to her, though, given the double curriculum, and the fact that she isn't in Gryffindor, or Black for that matter." Ron and Hermione stared at each other for a good 10 seconds before Ron spoke. "Let's hope things stay that way. We don't want dark wizards influencing the King of England." It had been a long day, but it had been worth it. When 5:00 came around, Amelia Bell packed up her stuff, shook hands with the rest of the professors, and started the walk back to Hogsmeade in her apartment. She started to understand why Meghan hadn't wanted to leave, and in one sense, she felt a little sorry for Meghan. She was surrounded by reporters as soon as she entered Hogsmeade. She gave as many interviews as she could. However, eventually she started getting hungry and had to think about getting dinner. She eventually was able to rid herself of all the reporters and make her way back to 59 Grey Street. She was about to enter the building when one more reporter tapped her on the shoulder. "Excuse me, Miss Bell, but would you be willing to answer a few more questions? It won't take long." Amelia was really starting to get hungry. She had to cut this short in a hurry. "5 minutes, tops. I'm really hungry." The reporter nodded. "That will do. I'm Darlene Lisa Wilkins, and I'm with Witch Weekly." Darina Vovchankaya went over the plan with Halina Zyganova. "All right, let me get this straight. You give me some of the polyjuice potion. I pose as a reporter, snatch Amelia Bell as soon as she gets home after work, and then become her double. I then enter the house to fool her roommates as you return home to your husband." Zyganova nodded. "That's about it. Each morning, you say goodbye to your roommates and call me. I head over to the school while you hide under that invisibility cloak, go to a big city, and try to study Muggle behavior around you. I teach the classes, take the Marauders map, and after a few weeks or so, eventually kill Dumbledore, take the wand, and cast that dark mark spell the Daily Prophet told us about to implicate the Death Eaters." Vavchinkaya continued with the plan. When we decide to kill Dumbledore, you go invisible, and I make my way into the school from the apartment so the staff will suspect you were there the whole time. It's a perfect alibi. On other days, we'll just follow the usual routine. I leave the school and come here. You brief me quickly on what you learned about the Muggles so I can fake her lessons. Then you return home to Amelia's roommates. Zygonova whistled and handed over a map. Clever, if I should say so myself. In the meantime, get ready and start heading over to the apartment. It's at 59 Grey Street. Here's a map and some polyjuice potion along with a bunch of her hairs. Good luck, Darina. Vavchinkaya thanked her, picked up all her paraphernalia, and headed over to Grey Street. She had just started wondering whether Amelia Bell had gone out partying when she saw her approaching. The red hair stood out easily. Vavchinkaya pulled out a piece of parchment and tapped the new professor on the shoulder. "Excuse me, Miss Bell, but would you be willing to answer a few more questions? It won't take long." The professor said she could spare a few minutes, so she followed her over into a little alcove so they could have some privacy for the interview. Amelia thought it was a bit strange, but she didn't say anything. Finally, the two of them were alone. Vavchinkaya knew what she herself looked like at age 54, and she had to admit that Amelia was not unattractive. Her face was unlined to boot, and Vavchinkaya found herself wishing she could keep that polyjuiced face forever. Not knowing any of this, Amelia turned to her and asked, "So, Ms. Wilkins, how can I help you?" Vavchinkaya just smiled and brought out her wand. "Somnolence." The spell hit Amelia in the chest, and she slumped to the ground. Vavchinkaya pulled out some more of Amelia's hairs for good measure, obliviated her, swapped clothes with her, and then shrank the poor woman with Reducio just like Zygonova had done with the reporter. Halina had been pleased to know that Reducio was permanent, until reversed with an engorgio or finite incantatum. Hoping that the rough handling wouldn't kill the woman, Vavchinkaya stuffed the woman in her bag and drank the polyjuice potion. Once the transformation was complete, she took the victim's keys and passes to Hogwarts and walked into the apartment. Each of the three women had her own room, which was a relief. As long as she told everyone that she wanted no intrusions while she slept, and she kept the windows closed, no one would be able to break her cover. The polyjuice potion apparently managed to transfer the fact that Amelia was hungry as well, so the first thing Wolanski did was look for the kitchen. She found it pretty quickly, along with both other girls. The black-haired one rounded on her. "Hi, Amelia, how was your day? Abby and I helped make dinner. We'll rotate. Is that okay?"